Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to my Svelte crash course. So in this crash course, we're going to learn all about Svelte while creating a project. And before we do that, I just want to quickly go over some slides and talk a little bit about what Svelte is. So technically speaking, Svelte is a compiler that generates minimal and highly optimized JavaScript code. So you might hear it referred to as a framework. In fact, I refer to it as a framework, and that's because it does a lot of the same things that a front-end framework would do. It allows you to basically create reusable UI components that have your output, your logic, your styling, and so on. And it allows you to create single-page applications much like React, Vue, and Angular. Now, it does differ in the way that it works compared to something like React. So Svelte is actually pretty easy to understand. The process is we write our code using the Svelte syntax, and then it runs through a compiler that turns it into pure optimized JavaScript code that can be read by the browser. So it doesn't inject any overhead code or anything like that, and the majority of the work is done at compile time. React, on the other hand, uses something called the virtual DOM, or virtual document object model, to interpret at runtime. So there's basically a virtual representation of the UI that's kept in memory and synced with the actual DOM. Then it looks at the difference and updates the actual DOM as needed. So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes with a React application. And if you want to learn more about that, I'm going to leave a link in the description to the article where I got this image. So let's take a look at some of the advantages or some of the reasons why you would want to use Svelte. So of course you can create dynamic front-end user interfaces. That's not really just Svelte, that's any modern framework. It does produce highly optimized JavaScript code with no overhead. There's no virtual DOM, as we talked about. In turn, things happen faster. Now, don't hold me account to this. I've done a little bit of research, but I came to find that Svelte overall is about 30% faster than other frameworks. And I'm sure there's a lot of variables that go into that, but there is a performance benefit in some areas. So Svelte also includes out-of-the-box animations and transitions that are really easy to use, and we'll go over some of those later on. It does have a great ecosystem as well. You have SvelteKit, which is basically like a Next.js for Svelte. It allows you to create server-side rendered apps, which is probably what I would suggest doing once you learn the basics of Svelte, just like I usually suggest React developers learn Next.js. There's also a tool called Svelte Native for building native mobile apps, which I have yet to use. And then one of the biggest reasons to use Svelte is its ease of use. I'm primarily a React developer, but I can say for sure that Svelte is easier to learn and you can do a lot more with less code. I will say I haven't built a large-scale application like I have with React, so I can't really speak to how Svelte scales on a personal level. If you're coming from React, though, I think you'll be pretty surprised to see how easy some stuff is to do when it comes to managing state and things like that. So as far as what you should know, I pretty much say the same thing about every framework. You should know JavaScript pretty well, including all the fundamentals like functions, loops, etc. Asynchronous programming, so promises, array methods like for each, map, filter. The fetch API you'll need to know if you want to work with any kind of backend or API. And then NPM, or the Node Package Manager, for installing packages and setting up boilerplates, etc. So just like in React, Vue, and Angular, we create user interfaces using components as building blocks. And Svelte components are very similar to Vue.js components if you have any experience with Vue, at least similar in the way they're structured. So all components have a .svelte extension, and you have your logic at the top, your JavaScript wrapped in script tags, then you have your output or your HTML in the middle, and then you can have your styling at the bottom within style tags. So this example here doesn't actually have styling, but you can see within the script tags you can set values, create functions. There's also something we can create called a reactive value, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then in our output, we can have any HTML. We can also use the curly brace syntax for anywhere where we want to output a variable or an expression or anything like that. There's also conditionals and each loops and things we can use within our HTML, and I'll go over all that stuff in a little bit. Now, to get started with Svelte, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can use Svelte Kit, but the easiest way to just get a single page app up and running is to use the Digit scaffolding tool. So that's what we'll do in a couple minutes. This will set everything up on your machine, including a dev server. By default, it uses the Rollup package manager, but you can also use build tools like Vite as well. All right, so before we get started and jump into some code, let's just take a look at the project that we'll be building. All right, so this is an example of the project we'll be building. It's a feedback app, and I got the inspiration for the design from UI Design Daily, which is an incredible site that has just tons and tons of UI elements for inspiration. And here we can select a rating. These are actually radio buttons that we're going to style to look like this. We'll say this is 8. And then we can give some feedback, and notice the button is disabled. That's because you need at least 10 characters. So if I start to type, it'll say text must be at least 10 characters. And once I hit that, that'll go away. The button is now active. We can send, and you'll see it'll get added down here. And notice there was a little scaling animation when it came in. We can also remove these. So if I hit this X, it'll remove, and it'll also have a little fading effect. And then we have this stats component here, which will show us the number of reviews and also the average of all the ratings. So if I were to add another one, let's say this is a test, and send, you can see that the ratings will update, the number of reviews will also update. All right, so we have quite a few components here. I'll explain that as we move along, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so like I said, there's a few ways to get up and running with Svelte. You can use Svelte Kit, which is basically like a Next.js. It gives you server-side rendering, gives you routing, but we're just going to create a basic single-page application. So we could use the REPL and download the zip file and install the dependencies, or we can use Digit, which is a scaffolding tool that will basically clone this Svelte.js template repo. And it includes a dev server and everything we need to get started. So that's what we're going to do. We could install Digit globally on our machine and then run it, but we can also use npx to just run it without installing it. So let's go ahead and do npx Digit and Svelte.js /template, and then I'm going to call this Svelte-feedback-app. So that should create that folder, Svelte Feedback App, and it will clone everything from that repository. So let's cd now into that directory. And if I do an ls, you can see the files and folders here. There's a package.json with some dependencies that need to be installed. So we're going to npm install, or npm I. All right, so now you just want to open this folder up in your text editor. I'm using VS Code, so I'm just going to do code dot, which will open up the current directory. I don't know why that opened, but now we have all of the files and folders on the left. And if you are using VS Code, I would definitely suggest installing the Svelte extension. So it's called Svelte for VS Code. And this will give you formatting, auto completions. It'll allow you to use Emmet within your Svelte components. So you definitely want to get that installed if you are using VS Code. So if we look at the package.json here, you'll see under dev dependencies, we have the Svelte compiler. And then we have Rollup, which is the module bundler that's being used. And you can use Svelte with other module bundlers like Vite, but with the way we just set this up with Digit, Rollup is the default. And then there's also this serve CLI under dependencies. This is used to serve the public folder, so basically a production version of our app. And then npm run dev will be the dev server, which uses Rollup with live reload. And then npm run build is what you run to actually compile all your Svelte code into pure optimized JavaScript, okay, for production. So let's look in, so we have the scripts folder as well. If you want to set up TypeScript, you can just run this. Actually, it shows us right here in the docs. You can run node and then that set up TypeScript, and that will get you started with TypeScript. And then we have a source and a public folder, much like we have in many other frameworks. And if we look in the public folder, there's an index.html, and this is the single page of the single page application. This is the page that's loaded in the browser. And notice there's nothing in the body. We actually bind our Svelte UI to the body. I'll show you that in a second, how that's done. And then we have this bundle.js that's being loaded. This is the complete compiled code. Okay, when we do npm run build, it creates this build folder with this bundle.js, and that's what's being included. In addition to that, we have the global CSS, which is right here. You can directly edit that for global styles, and then bundle CSS will have any styling from your components. All right, so let's look in the source folder, which is really simple. There's only 2 files here. Main.js is basically your entry point, and here, just like with React and other frameworks, we're bringing in a main app component. We're initializing a new app, and we're binding that to document.body. Okay, so that's the target that we specify here. And then you can also pass in props into your main app component. So you don't need this. This is just as an example, passing in a prop of name with the string of world. And then if we look at app.svelte, this is our main component. And the way components are constructed is pretty simple. We have our script at the top. So we have script tags with any JavaScript. We have our output or our HTML here, and we can have dynamic variables and expressions and so on with the curly brace syntax, much like every other framework. And then we also have style tags if you want to style something in that particular component. So what I'm going to do now is run npm run dev with my internal terminal. What is this called? Integrated terminal. And that's going to open up on localhost 5000. So let's go ahead and do that. And you're going to see something like this. It might look a little different depending on when you're watching this, but you'll see some kind of boilerplate page like this. Now, what I want to do is get rid of that prop that's being passed in, so we can actually just delete this in the main.js. And it's going to say hello undefined because now name is undefined. So let's get rid of this export since it's no longer a prop being passed in, and let's just set this to a value. So I'm going to set it to Brad, and you'll see that it'll update with hello Brad. Let's just make these a little smaller here. And what I'm going to do is add another value here. In fact, I'm going to change this to first name, and then we'll have last name. And everything I'm doing right now is just to kind of show you the basics, the fundamentals of working in components. We're going to start on our project in a couple minutes. So let's change this to last name. And now if I save that, it just says hello because name is no longer it's no longer there. Now I want to show you how we can create what's called a reactive value. So to create a reactive value, we use the $sign and then colon, and then we can define a variable. So here we're going to say that name is going to be equal to first name, and then let's add a space, and then let's also add the last name. So now if I save that, we'll see hello Brad Traversy, or whatever you have for first name and last name. And whenever either of these changes, if I put Brad1 here and save, this is going to react to it, and you'll see that'll change to Brad1 as well. All right, so these are reactive values. Now I'm going to add another variable here. So let's say color, and we'll set this to red. Actually, let's set it to blue. And what's nice about Svelte, well, one of the nice things about it is if we want to change any of these values, we simply just, say first name equals, and we could say John, and save, and that's going to work. So there's no like set state like in React where you have to use hooks or anything like that. And there's a lot of just cool little simple things in Svelte like that. I think it just simplifies things, and that's really what I really like about it. So we have a color of blue. Let's go to this H1 here, and let's say we want to set style, and we'll say we want the color to be, and then we can actually use the curly braces in here and say color, and now you can see that the H1 is blue. Now I want to show you how we can work with events. So what I'm going to do is go under the paragraph here, and I'm going to create a button, and we'll just say click. And then the way we define events, we don't do like on click like this. We do on colon and then whatever the event we want, in this case is a click. And we can set that to either an inline function or a named function. So I could, for example, just put an arrow function here, and let's say we want to change color. We'll set color to back to red. Actually, let's do something else. We'll do purple. Okay, so now if I click this, you'll see that the color will change to purple. Now if I want to make this a named function, I could just get rid of this and let's call it toggle. Okay, we'll go up here now. We have to obviously go into our script and let's say const toggle. And we'll set that to an arrow function, and yeah, we'll use curly braces here. And let's set color to, actually, you know what we'll do? We'll set this to a conditional. So we'll say color equals, and say if color is equal to blue, which is what I set it to as default, then we're going to set color to red, else we'll set it to blue, so that way we can toggle the color. So now if I go over here, it starts off as blue, I click, it goes to red, and I can toggle that color. Okay, so that's how we can create events with functions. Now let's take a look at conditionals real quick. So this paragraph here, let's make it so we can toggle this, and I can show you how to use conditionals. So I'll create a value up here, and we'll call this show text. And let's set that to false by default. And then we'll go down here, and right above the paragraph, I'm going to open up some curly braces. And the syntax for this is $if, and then we're going to say if show text. And then we want to put our ending if here, which is just curly braces and /if. Okay, and we'll just tab that over. So now, once I save that, you can see that the paragraph goes away. So what I'm going to do is in this toggle, which runs when we click on this button, let's go ahead and set show text. We're going to set it to the opposite of whatever it is, so not show text. And if I save and we click this, not only does the color change to the heading, but it also toggles the text. And when you do a conditional, you can also have an else. So to do that, we can just do :else. And then we can put something in here like, we'll put a paragraph, and we'll just say no text, which doesn't really make any sense, but I just want to show you how this works. So now it starts off as false. So this is false, so the else is showing, which is no text. If I click this, it gets set to true, and it shows the paragraph, and it toggles that. All right, so that's conditionals. Now, the last thing I want to show you before we jump into our project is each loops, because we can, obviously, you're going to have some data that you'll want to loop through and then display something for each value. So let's create up here, let's say let, and I don't know, we'll just call this users, and create an array of objects, and we'll just do an ID and a name. And then let's we'll just copy this down. So this one will be ID 2, and let's say, I don't know, Sarah. And then this one 3, we'll say Bob. All right, so we have an array here of 3 users with an ID and a name. So let's go down, we'll just go under the button here. We're just going to go ahead and do a $each. And we called it, what do we call it, users. So we'll say each users as, and then user. And then if you're familiar with React, when you create a list and you loop through some data, you have a key. Now we want a key here, but the way we set that is in parentheses, and we'll say that user.id is going to be our key. And then we want to end that each, and then we should be able to put whatever we want in here. So let's do an h3, and let's say we want the user.name. Actually, we'll put the ID. We'll do user.id colon and then user name. So if I save that, now you'll see we get our ID and name for each user displayed on the screen. Now let's say when I click this, I want to add a new name to this array. So we'll go up here where we have our toggle, and we have access to users from here, but we don't want to do this. We don't want to say users.push, because we need to basically reassign users. So what we would do is we would say users equals, and we would set that to something. So what I would do here is set it to an array, and I want all of the users that are already in the array. So I would do ... This is the spread operator, and users. So basically it's going to take the 3 objects that are already in there and put it in here. Then in addition to that, I want to add a new user. So here I'll put an ID and we'll set that to 4, and then let's set a name for this user and we'll set that to Jen. So now if I save that and I come over here and I click, you'll see that Jen gets added to the array. All right, and that's pretty much it for just the basic fundamentals of working in a component. You know, how to set values or set state, how to create reactive values, how to use events, loops, and conditionals. So now we're going to start on our project so we can actually get rid of all this stuff here. Let's get rid of all of our data, get rid of this function, and we'll just get rid of all this. And for now, we'll just have, let's just do an H1 with hello. And we can get rid of all this style too. All right, so let's save that. And now we should just see hello. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add some global styles. I don't have a lot, but let's go in this public global CSS, and I'm going to just get rid of everything that's in here. And let me grab my styling real quick. So I'm going to paste this in. It's really not a lot. I'm just importing the Poppins font, adding a reset. Now the color, ultimately everything's going to be wrapped in a card component and the color will be dark. But for now, since we don't have the card created yet, I'm going to make the text color white so we can see it on the purple background that's set right here. So let's go ahead and save that. There we go. We can close that up. And as far as the data that we're going to be using, ultimately it's going to be kept in a store. I'm going to show you how to do that towards the end. But for now, all of our feedback is going to just be kept in the app.svelte file. So in the script tags here, I'm going to paste in an array of 3 feedback items that have an ID, a rating, and a text value. And the first thing I want to do as far as components is have the feedback list. And then that list will have each feedback item in a separate component as well. So let's create a new component in source. So I'm going to first of all create a folder called components, and then in here let's create a new file called feedback list, and it's going to have a Svelte extension. Okay, all your components will have a Svelte extension. And while we're at it, let's also create a feedback item.svelte as well, because each item will be wrapped in its own component too. Now in the feedback list, let's go ahead and create our script tags, and for now let's just put we'll just say feedback list, and I want to bring this into our main app component. So up at the top here, let's go ahead and import feedback list from, and then that's going to be ./component/feedback list.svelte. And let's go down here, and instead of this H1, let's go ahead and just say feedback list. So again, if you're familiar with other frameworks, this is going to be very similar in terms of how the components work. So now we can see that displayed on the screen. Now to pass a prop in here, because obviously we need our data. Your data should be stored, if you're not using stores or anything, it should be stored in the top level component, which is app.svelte. And then you pass it down to where you need it, such as in this feedback list. So let's pass in feedback, set that equal to curly braces feedback. So now we're passing in this prop. Now what's nice about Svelte is if this is the same as this, then we don't even need to have feedback equals. We can simply do that, and that's still passing it in. Now to basically catch that prop, like you saw in the beginning, we have an export, and then we'll say let feedback, and we'll just set this to an empty array. It's going to be set by this right here, but just in case that's not passed in, this will just be an empty array. So we should have access to our data from here. If I console log feedback, and then we go over here and let's open up our console, and you can see it's console logging those 3 items. So now that we're logging those 3 items, what we're going to want to do is loop through each one and output a feedback item. So let's see, we'll just go down here and let's do an each loop. So we'll say each feedback as, and we'll just do FB. And then for the index, let's do fb.id. And then we want to close our each loop. And ultimately, we want this to be a feedback item component. But for now, just to test it out, let's do an h3. And we should have access to like feedback.text. So if we save that, let's see, it's not working. Oh, I'm sorry, it's FB, because we said as FB. And there we go. So now we can see the 3 text values showing here. So instead of, like I said, instead of doing this, we're going to want to use our feedback item. So we're going to bring that in here. Actually, let's put this, yeah, we'll put this right here. So import feedback item from, and it's in the same folder, so just feedback item.svelte. And then instead of this, we're going to say feedback item, and then that's going to take in each item as a prop. So I'm going to call this item, and we're going to pass in each FB. Okay, so these aren't the same, so we have to leave the items equal, or item equal. Now, in our feedback item component, let's go ahead and first of all add our script tags, and then we want to export. We're going to export, I'm sorry, let item. Did I do that here too? Yeah, just make sure you have let. And then let's see, we'll go down to our output here. Now I want to have a card. I want this wrapped in a white rounded corner card, and I'm going to want to do that in a few different places. I want it on the item. I also want it on the form when we create that. So I think that we should make card a separate component. All right, so let's go into components and let's create a new file called card.svelte. And you could put this in a separate folder for like UI, because this is a UI thing. It has nothing to do with data. But let's go ahead and add in. And the way I want to do it or display it is I want to do card, card, and then anything that we want in that card, I want to go in here. So in order to do that, we use something called slots. In fact, let me import the card component. So that's going to be from card. All right, now in here, I'm just going to put in hello for now. Okay, and then let's go to card.svelte, and from here, we're not going to have any JavaScript here. All we need to do is have a div. Actually, let's have a div with the class of card so we can style it. And then whatever I pass in here, I want to display. So we do that using a slot. Okay, so we basically just have these custom slot tags. So if I go ahead and save that, now you'll see we get hello 3 times. Because what we're doing is in our feedback list, we're bringing in our feedback, we're looping through, and we're displaying the feedback item. And in the feedback item, we have our card component, and then we have whatever we want to display in the card passed in. In this case, it's just hello. Obviously, it's going to be the item ultimately. Now, before we move on, let's just style our card real quick. I'm sorry, we need style tags here. And sometimes Emmet doesn't work. Not sure why, but we'll just add it ourselves. And then let's do card. And I want this to have a background color of white. And let's do a border radius. We'll do 15 pixels for that. Padding. Let's do 40 pixels, 50 pixels. Margin. We'll do 20 pixels top and bottom. And I'm going to position this relative just so we can position the number inside of it absolute. All right, so if we save that, actually let's add a color as well. So we'll say color for this is going to be 333. Okay, so now we have these card components, and anytime we want to use this, we simply wrap whatever we want to put inside the card in these card tags, which is nice. Now let's get rid of this hello and let's display our data. Now I'm going to have some classes in here, so I'm going to have a class of num display. That's where I want the rating to go. So inside here, let's put item.rating. And then underneath that, we're gonna be able to remove these or delete these. So I'm gonna have a close class as well, div with a class of close, and in here I'm just going to have an X. You can put a custom icon if you want, but that's good enough. And then let's do a paragraph with the class of text-display, and in here this is where we want to put our item.text. So if we save that, we should now see the rating, the number, and then the text, and then we also have this close button. So we do want to add some styling to this. So I'm going to go down here and add some style tags, and I'm just going to paste this in just so I don't have to type all this CSS out. So basically the num display I want to go up here in the corner, so I'm positioning it absolute, and it's going to be a rounded pink circle, and then the close button is going to be positioned absolute over here. So if I save this, there we go, so that looks a lot better. But one thing I think I forgot, I didn't add the container class. So remember, in our global CSS we have this container class, max width 768. So I just want to add that to the main tag in the app component. So let's say class equals container. Okay, so now, that will push it down a little and put it right in the middle. And we might want to add some padding onto that, just so on small screens, I mean, it's not really responsive. I didn't really care about that, but we should probably just add a little bit of padding. We'll do 0 top and bottom. Let's do 10 left and right. We'll do 20 just to kind of push it in a little bit. Yeah. All right, so now we're displaying our feedback items. So I think what I want to do now, before we move on to creating the form, which is the more difficult part, I want to show you how we can add an event to delete each one of these. So let's go into our feedback item. And initially I have a div for this close. We should probably change that to a button. And if I do that, it's going to give it a border and a background. So we just want to add down here, we'll say background none and border none. All right, so let's add an event onto this button. So we're going to say on:click, and let's set that. Now we're going to have to pass in an argument of the ID, because it needs to know which one we're deleting. So instead of just putting handle delete in here, which is what I'm going to call the function, I'm going to have a function and then call handle delete, and then have some parentheses, and then pass in the item. Whoops, the hell. Pass in the item.id. Okay, and then we'll go up into our script here, and let's say const handle delete, and that's going to take in, let's call this item ID. And then for now, let's just console log and make sure that that actually works. Okay, so now I'm going to open up my console here, and if I click on this, I should see the ID down here in the console, 1, 2, and 3. All right, now we have to send this up to the main app component because that's where our data is, right? We're not, we don't have direct access to that array from the feedback item component. So what we do is we dispatch a custom event. And the way we do that is we can import something called create event dispatcher, and that's going to be from Svelte. And then we need to define a variable here called dispatch, and we want to set that to create event dispatcher. So now we can go wherever we want, and we can call this dispatch function. So we'll change this console log right here to dispatch. And what we want to do is in here is set for the first argument, this is going to be our custom event. So you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it delete-feedback. And then as a second argument here, you can pass in your data, which in our case is going to be the ID because it needs to know which ID. So when I click this, it's going to call this dispatch, which right now isn't doing anything because we didn't catch this custom event anywhere. Now, since feedback item is embedded in the feedback list, this is where we would catch that custom event. So here we can do on, and just like we can do on click, for example, we can do on and then our custom event, which is delete feedback. Now, we also don't have direct access to the array from the feedback list component. So what we can do is just leave this as is, and this will forward it up to the feedback list component. All right, so we don't have to actually, equal and set this to anything. We just leave this as is, and then we can go up to the main app component where the feedback list is, and we're basically forwarding it onto this. It's called event forwarding. So here, let's say we'll go right here and we'll say on delete feedback, and then we're going to set that to a function called delete feedback. Okay, so now we can go up here into our script in our main app component and say const delete feedback, and we're going to pass in an event parameter here. And remember, when we initially created, or when we initially dispatched this, we also passed in this item ID. So the way that we can fetch this item ID in here is through this event parameter. There's a value called or a property called detail. So let's go ahead and console log e.detail. And now if I go over here and I click this, we're going to see the ID. So what it's doing is it's dispatching from feedback item into feedback list, which we're then just forwarding because we didn't set an equals here. So it's forwarding up to app, and then we're catching it here, and we're then calling this function, and we have access to the ID through e.detail. Now let's actually set a variable here, so this is more clear of what this is. We'll say item ID is equal to e.detail because that's what it is. And then to delete it, and we're just deleting from the UI. We don't have like a back end where we make requests or anything like that. But we're now going to set feedback. Remember, we're basically resetting the feedback array. So what we'll do is we'll say feedback.filter. So feedback being this up here, these three items, and we want to filter out the one we're deleting. So filter takes in a callback, and in here we just want to pass in item. So for each item, and then we'll say where the item.id is not equal to the item ID that's coming from the custom event when we click. So it'll filter out that one. So let's save that. Let's go over here and let's click on delete. So that, yeah, that was the one with 10. So that goes away. That goes away. All right, so we're able to now delete our feedback items. Now I think what I want to do next is the stats component. We want to show the number of feedback reviews or feedback items, and then we also want to show the average of all the ratings. And we're going to do that with reactive values. So in our app.svelte, let's go right below the array here. And first of all, we want to get a count. So I'm going to use my $:: syntax here and say count, and we want that to be equal to the feedback.length. So very easy. And we could even show this down here. I'm not going to keep this, but let's just put an H1 here and say, whoops, count. So now you'll see 3. If I go ahead and delete one, it reacts to it, and we have 2, 1, 0. Okay, so now we know we have the count. Now I also want to get the average. So let's say we want to do $:; we'll call this average, and we're going to take feedback and use the reduce high order array method, and in here we'll have a function, and then we want to have 0 here, which is the is this right? Hold on, 0 is the current index. Yeah, so we should be able to pass in here the previous value, which we'll represent with A, and then we want the rating. Let me close the sidebar up here. So rating, is this right? Yeah, and then in the function body here, we want to take A and add the rating to that. Yeah, A plus rating, and then we should just be able to divide that by the length to get the average. So we want to divide that by feedback.length. And I think that should work. So let's actually test it out. We'll go down here, and just for now, let's have H1 and have the average. Okay, so right now we have average 9. And if I get rid of this one, let's get rid of 10. So now it's 8.5. Now it's 8. And if there's none at all, then it's going to give us not a number, which we can check for within our stats component when we create it. So let's go ahead and create that now. I'm going to get rid of this H1, and I'm going to create a new component here. Let's say new file. We'll call this feedback stats, and we want to give it a Svelte extension. And this is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to take in 2 props. So we want to do export let count. It's going to take that in, and it's also going to take in the average. And then we just want to display those nicely. So let's have a div with the class of feedback-stats. And then in here we'll have an H4 and put the count. So count, and then I'll put the word reviews. And let's do, let's see, we'll get rid of this. This is going to be the average. And just before that, I'm going to do ratings average colon. And then for styling, I'm going to, let's see, we need our class, feedback stats. And we're going to display flex because I want them to be side by side right here with the count on this side and then the average on this side. So this will put them in a row. Then we want to justify, let's do justify content, and we'll set that to space between so that they're on each side. And then let's just align items to the center. Okay, so now in our main app component, let's bring in our stats. So we'll go right here and change this to feedback stats. And let's go down here, feedback stats, and we just want to pass in the count, and we want to pass in the average. And there we go. So 3 reviews, 9 is the average rating. If I delete one, it reacts right here, these reactive values, and then those values are passed into the stats and it updates. Okay, so really cool. So now we want to do the form, and I'm just going to make this a little wider just to kind of fit it in there. And let's create a new component. So over here we'll create feedback form.svelte. And let's add our script tags in here. And we have quite a bit to do here, so I need to kind of figure out how I'm going to lay this out. Let's start out by just outputting the form. So down here, let's say form. I don't know why that's doing that. All right, so we have our form, and we're going to have a rating select. Okay, the number select is going to be its own component. I'm going to do that after, so I'm just going to put a comment here that says rating select, because we're going to do the input first. So we're going to have an input group, which is going to have the text input and the button. Okay, so the way that we're styling it, we're going to wrap it in this class. So let's put an input in here. And I'm going to add a placeholder. So let's set that to tell, we'll say tell us something that keeps you coming back. And then underneath the input, we're going to have a button. Now I want the button to be its own component, but we'll do that in a few minutes. For now, let's just add a button here, and we'll say send. Okay, and then let's just save this for now and go into our main app component, and let's bring that in. So I'm actually going to put this at the top here. So we want to bring in feedback form, and then let's add that down here. It's going to go at the top. So feedback form. So if we save that, we have a very ugly looking form. So let's add some styling to this. I'm going to just paste it in because it's quite a bit. And then the rest of this is going to be styling, so I'm going to just paste this in. So we have our basic button styles, and then we have a primary and a secondary. Okay, so if we pass in a prop of style secondary, it'll get styled, it'll add that class. In fact, we have to do that here. So we just want to add type, and this is the same as saying type equals type. And then we also want disabled, and then the class is going to be set to whatever that style is, so primary or secondary. Then we have some styling for the disabled state, so it'll just be gray if it's disabled. And that should do it. So let's save that. We'll close that up, and let's go back into our form, and let's bring in our button. Okay, so we'll say button. And then let's go down here and let's replace this with uppercase button, and we're going to pass in here a type, not a style. You could do style if you want, but it's primary by default, and that's what I want to use. But let's do a type of submit, because we want this to be a submit button for this form. And then for the disabled, what I'm going to do is we do want it disabled at first. So let's go up here and let's say btn, or let btn disabled, and let's set that to true by default. And then we can come down here and we can pass in, I'm sorry, this type should be just a string, it's not a variable. Okay, and then let's say btn, or no, disabled, which is the prop name, and we want to set that to our btn disabled. So let's save that, and now you can see that that's disabled. If I change this initial value to false, then the button is not disabled. All right, but we do want that to be true at first. Now let's do the validation for the text, because remember, it has to have 10 characters at least before the button even works. So what we'll do is we'll add an event onto this input. So let's say on, and it's going to be input, and then we'll set that to handle input. Okay, so whenever we type into this text box, it'll call this function. So let's go up here and let's say const handle input. Okay, and then what we're going to want to do is check the length of text, right? Because it's bound to this text box. So let's say if, and we'll say if text, and let's trim any white space. So we'll say if text trim dot length is less than or equal to, now I could hard code the number in here, but I'm actually going to set it up here. We'll say let min, and let's set that to 10. And then we'll say if it's less than or equal to the minimum value, which we set to 10. If that's true, then let's have a message value as well. So we'll just initialize that right here. And then if that's true, then message, we're going to set that to, let's use backticks here. And we'll say text must be at least, and then we want to put that min value, whatever that is, characters. Okay, and then we're going to set the button disabled. We want to set that to true. Okay, because if it's less than 10, we don't want the button, we want it to be disabled, we don't want them to be able to click it. Else, when they get past 10, then we're going to set message to null. And we also want them to be able to click the button. So we'll say button, button disabled. We'll set that to false. Okay, so it's kind of a real-time validation. And then for the message, let's output that. So we want to go outside of the input group and just have a class of message. And actually, you know what? We want to put this in a conditional because we only want it to show if there is a message. So let's do if message, Oops. So if there's a message, then we want to have our class of message, and inside that we'll have whatever is in that value. All right, so that looks good. We should be able to try this out now. So this is disabled. If I type something, we're going to now see the message that the text must be at least 10 characters. If I keep typing, once I pass 10, I'll be able to submit the form. So it's kind of like a real-time, real-time validation. So now that we've done that, let's see. I think the next thing we should do before we work on the submit is the rating select, because we want to have those cool numbers that we can select from. So let's create a new component, and we'll call this rating select dot svelte, and let's add a script. Now in our form, we're gonna need a value for the rating in our state. So let's go right here and let's say let rating, and we'll set the default to 10, just so that's selected, when the user comes to the page. And then inside of our rating select here, what I'm going to do is have a bunch of radio buttons, and we're going to style those to look like numbers. So I'm just going to grab that HTML because it's a lot, and I'm going to put that here. And I'm just going to go over this real quick. So we have a UL with the class of rating. In each list item, we have a radio input. Each one has an ID of num1, this one's num2, and so on. Then we have a name of rating. The value is going to be 1 through 10 for each one. And then we have an onChange, which is going to call an onChange function. So whenever we select one of these, it's going to call this onChange, which I'm going to create in a second. And then we want it selected if this selected value is 1, 2, 3, and so on. So we do want to have up here, let's say let selected, and we'll set that to 10. But when they click, it'll call this onChange, right? So I'll create that in a second. But I do want to just add the styling for this. We can save it right now, and actually let's create the onChange so that we don't get yelled at. So we'll say const onChange. And for now, we'll just, console log 1. But let's go to our, we want to go to our feedback form, and let's import rating select from /rating select. And then we're going to put this down here where I have this comment, rating select. And if I save that, this is what it looks like without styling. So now let's go back here, and let me just grab this CSS. Okay, so I'm going to paste this in. So we have the rating class that we're styling, which is the UL, each LI, and then the label, and this here. So we're going to make the actual select, the circle here, is going to be invisible. And then when checked, the label is going to have a pink background. So let's save that. And now you can see 10 is selected because that's what we set up here, right? Selected equals 10, and we have this checked attribute equal to whatever is selected. If I click 8, that's going to be selected, and so on. Okay. Now, for the onChange, what we want to do is dispatch a custom event with whatever this selected is, because we have to bring it up into the form to change this value, the rating. So let's go ahead and do that. So in the onChange, we're going to pass in our event parameter, and let's just console log that. We want to get the e dot, and we should be able to do current target and then the value. That should give us the actual number value. So let's try that out. So if I click that, there's 3, 5, 6, and so on. All right, so let's then take that selected value in the state and set that to whatever that value is. Then we want to dispatch, but we do need to bring in our create dispatcher. So let's say import create event dispatcher. That's going to be from Svelte. And then we need to just, I guess we'll do this right here. We need to create our dispatch function. Set that to create event dispatcher. And then down here, let's dispatch our custom event. And we're going to call that rating select. And we want to pass up whatever select it is. Okay. So now let's go to our feedback form and basically catch this. So where we embedded the rating select right here, we're going to have on and then our custom event, which is rating select. And then we're going to call a function called handle select. Okay, so we'll go up here and let's create const handle select. And this is going to be pretty simple. I don't even need to use curly braces here, just an arrow, and then we're going to set rating equal to whatever e.detail. Because remember, when you have a custom event and you pass a value, you can then get that value with e.detail. So that should change the select. All right, so now once we have, something, whoops, what's this? Select is not defined. Select is not defined. On rating select. Oh, I'm sorry, this should be selected. Okay, so when I select one of these and we type something in, now we want an event for this form submit. So because now we have access to whatever the value of text and rating is, so we just need to submit the form now. So down here we have form, let's say on, we're going to use submit. Now we also have something called event modifier. No, are they event modifiers? I think they're called event modifiers, but we can basically do a pipe character here. And we could do like once, for example, which would only let us submit it once. There's also a prevent default, and that's what I want. Instead of having to do e.prevent default, when we submit it to the function, we can actually just do it right here. So we want to set this to, let's say, handle submit. Okay, so now we just want to go up here and let's do const handle submit. And we do want to just validate and make sure that the text is longer than 10. I know we have it here, but people could go into the dev tools and they could make this so it's not disabled. So you do want to check it again here. So let's say if text.trim, if that length is, let's say, less than or equal to whatever min is. Actually, no, let's say if it's greater. We'll say if it's greater than min, because that's what we want, then we'll go ahead and submit. So let's say const, and I'm going to create an object called new feedback, because this is ultimately what we want to submit. It's going to have the text, which is also called text, so instead of this, I can just do this. And then also rating. Now rating is going to get submitted as a string. I want it to be a number, so I can add a plus sign onto this to make rating a number. Now I also want it to have an ID. And there's a bunch of ways that we could do this to create a custom ID. I'm actually going to use a package called UUID, which I've used in other tutorials you may have seen before. So let's npm install UUID. Run our server again, and this is pretty simple. We can just go up here and import this. Since it's an external module, I'm going to import it at the top. So let's say v4 as UUID v4, and that's going to be from UUID. Okay, now we can just call this function wherever we want to create a random ID. So I'm going to go right here, and let's call UUID v4, which will give us a custom ID. So now let's just console log for now, new feedback. And now if we submit the form, let's say we choose 8, this is a test, and send, and there we go. So now we have an ID, a rating, and text. So now I want you to stop and think about what we should do right now. Okay, we don't have access to the feedback, right? We don't have access to this data from within feedback form. So I want you guys to pause this video and try to make it so that when you submit, it adds a new feedback. All right, so just pause the video, try it out, and then come back. So we have to dispatch a custom event, right? Because we need to dispatch up to app.svelte. So let's bring in, let's see, we'll go right here and let's import create event dispatcher. Okay, and then we need to create our dispatch. So we'll set that to create event dispatcher. And then down in our submit, instead of console logging, let's go ahead and dispatch, and our custom event, I'm going to call it add feedback, and we're sending along new feedback. Okay, so now we go into our app.svelte, and in our form we should be able to say on add feedback, and we're going to have a function called add feedback. All right, so now let's go up here and let's say add feedback, and we should be able to get the new feedback with e.detail. So let's just check that out, because that's what we sent in the custom event. So let's choose a number here, let's type something in and send. Okay, so now it's logging from here. Now to add this, we're just going to, first of all, let's call this new feedback, set that to e.detail, and then we need to, remember, we can't just push it on, I showed you that in the beginning. We need to say feedback equals something. So let's take the array, let's add the new feedback, whoops, what did I just do? New feedback, and then we want to spread across the the three that were already there. All right, so that should do it. Let's save. Now let's go ahead and say this is a test, send. There we go, so it gets added. Now we should clear this form when we're done as well. So back in feedback form, after we dispatch, let's just simply set text back to an empty string. All right, and obviously this is not going to stay because we don't have any back end, or Svelte is a front end framework. Now I want to show you how to make this much cleaner with using stores for our state rather than passing props up and down or creating custom events to pass props up and so on, because we really don't need to do that. But before that, I just want to show you how we can add some cool transitions. So when we delete, it just kind of flicks away. Same thing when we add, it just flicks on the screen. So we can add some transitions to make that look a little nicer. So we want to do this in the feedback list. So right here we're looping through, and this is where we display each item. Now the transition, you can't add on to a custom component, so we will have to wrap this in a div and just move this up into here. And then what we'll do is import. So there's different, there's fade, there's scale, there's slide. I'm going to use scale and fade, so let's import fade and, whoops, oh, actually that's not what I want. Yeah, so we want to import fade and scale from, and it's going to be Svelte transition. Okay, and then down here in our div, we should be able to add, we should say transition, and then fade or scale or slide, whatever you want. And let's save that, and let's see what happens if I delete. And you can see it fades away. If I add something, it fades in. Now, if you want to set something different for in and out, like you might want it to scale in, which is what I'm going to do, and fade out, then instead of transition fade, we can say in, and then let's do scale for in, and then we can say out, and let's say fade for out. And you can also set properties. So for instance, I might want to set here, we want to do double curly braces, and we could set a duration, for instance. And you can look at the documentation for everything that's available. So let's say duration 500 milliseconds or whatever. And then if I add something here, this is a test. So if I add, it scales in. Okay, so it starts small and it goes bigger. If I delete, it fades. So we have a different transition depending on if we're adding or removing. There's also there's animations and tweens, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can get into in terms of animations, but I'm not going to go over that. This video is already longer than I thought it would be. So I want to get into stores now. So let's close everything up except app.svelte, and we're going to create in our source folder here a new file called stores.js. Now, you can do this in different ways. You might have a folder called stores and then have separate stores in those. But if your stores aren't going to have, you know, a ton of stuff in them, then I mean, you can do it this way. It's really up to you. It's just preference. But we're going to import Writable. So we want to import Writable from Svelte/store. So your stores can be readable. They can also be writable. So we're going to export from here, const, and I'm going to call this feedback store and set that to writable. So we're setting it to a writable store. And you can pass in here your default state, which for us is all this feedback right here. So I'm actually going to grab these objects, these three, let's grab these three objects, and then we can completely get rid of this. And this is what I mean. It's going to really clean things up because we're no longer storing it in our app component. So let's paste that in and save, and that should be all we need for now. Now it's going to break our application because it doesn't know, it doesn't know what feedback is anymore because it's in a store. So let's see, I'm trying to think where I want to put this. So let's first just get back the feedback list. So if we go into components, because we're no longer getting it from here, so we need to go into feedback list, and let's see, we're not going to have to take this in as a prop anymore because we can get it directly from the store. So let's go up here and let's import feedback store from, and we want to go, let's see, outside of components and then stores. All right, so we're bringing feedback store in. Now there's a couple different ways we can do this as far as getting the data and using it down here. So I'll show you the longer way first. So we can say Facebook. I almost wrote Facebook. Feedback store, and then we need to subscribe to our store to get the data. So this subscribe function takes in callback, and then this callback takes in the data, so we get access to the data, and then we can set feedback, which is the variable up above, we can set that to the data. All right, now this still isn't going to show because now that I took, maybe I should put that array back here just for now, because like this is looking, count and average are looking for feedback and it doesn't have it, but I do want to be able to see. Let me see if I comment this out. All right, you know what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to put the array back just for now because other things are breaking because I got rid of it. However, this should now be coming from the store because of what we did in feedback list. In fact, if I go into my stores.js and I change this rating to a 2 and go back, you'll see that that changed. So we know that the feedback list is getting it from the store. Now, when you subscribe to a store and to get the data, you should also unsubscribe too. And you can do that using what's called a lifecycle method. Just like you have in class-based components in React, you have, for instance, onMount, and you do have to bring these in. So let's go up here and let's import, say, onMount and on destroy, and that's going to be from Svelte. So down here, let's say onMount and call that, and that takes in a function. And then we're not using onMount. I just want to show you that this will be called when the component is mounted. So here, yeah, you can see mounted. So this, you can do HTTP requests from here, you know, if you want to get some data from a back end or something like that. And then we're just seeing this feedback list was created with an unknown prop. That's because in our app.svelte, we're still passing in feedback here, which we no longer need to pass in for the feedback list, because remember, we're getting it from the store now. Now, like I said, you should unsubscribe, so you would do that in the on destroy. So let's say on destroy, and then from here you would unsubscribe. And the way we do that, when you call this feedback subscribe, it actually returns a function to unsubscribe. So we could say const unsubscribe, set that, and then we can call unsubscribe here in the on destroy, just so you don't rack up you know, these subscriptions. And by the way, the form isn't going to work right now because, you know, the form is still working with the array in the app.svelte. And we'll get to that in a minute. But if you don't want to do all this, there's actually a much easier way. So I'm actually going to comment out all of this. I'm going to leave it here, but comment it out just so you have it. But what we can do is use the feedback store directly. So instead of using feedback right here, we can say $, feedback store, and just use it just like that. So if I save, it'll still work, and it's still coming from the store. And this will unsubscribe automatically. So doing it this way does all of this just in a shorthand way. But it's up to you on how you want to use it. I'm just going to comment out these as well because we're not using them. All right, so now that we're getting the data from the store, there's a few other things we need to do. So let's go in the item, so feedback item, because here we're deleting, but we're actually calling in handle delete. We dispatched a custom event up to the list, which we forwarded right here, and then we went up to app. We don't need to do that anymore because we can access the store directly from feedback item. So what I'm going to do is delete. Let's see. I'll keep that function there because we'll just get rid of it. So we'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of this on delete feedback that calls delete feedback. So we're going to be cleaning up this stuff pretty nicely and not passing in all these props. Now in feedback list, let's get rid of the event forwarder. I'm not going to need that. And then in feedback item, let's see, we're still going to call a function called handle delete, but we no longer need to dispatch. So we can actually get rid of that, and we can get rid of this. And then what we'll do is instead of dispatching a custom event, we're going to just do it from here because we're able to use our store. So let's import feedback store from, that's going to be .. stores. And I mean, if you don't want to use the store, you don't have to. You can keep it how we had it, but I think this really cleans things up, especially if it starts to, you start to scale your application. So now in the handle delete, instead of this, what we can do is we can call feedback no, feedback store, not stats, store. And since it's a writable store, we can call an update function here. And this takes in a function, and we can get the current state or the current data here. So we'll call this current feedback. And then all we want to do here is return something as the current feedback. And we want to filter, because remember this is a delete, so we want to filter out the item that we want to delete. So let's say item, and then we'll say we're the item.id. If it's not equal to the item ID passed in, then we're going to filter it out, and that's what's being returned to the store. All right, so let's go over here and let's delete, and you'll see now they're getting deleted. Now notice the stats are not updating. That's because, again, the stats aren't connected to the store yet. So let's do that next. And we can see feedback item. Why? I don't know why these got put in here. All right, so now that's all set. And see, that's all set. So let's do the stats now. So feedback stats. Initially, we're passing in the count and the average into the component from here, because feedback, it's still dealing with this array, which we don't want. We want to use the store now. So we can actually clear this up and have these reactive values, we can use those in the stats component itself. So let's go in here and let's paste that in here. And then let's bring in our store. So import feedback store. It's going to be what, /stores. Okay, so we have our feedback store. Now instead of this right here, actually instead of this, and this, it's going to be money sign feedback store, because we can access that data directly with that. And then let's see, we don't even need, we shouldn't even need these. So we're setting count and average based on the store. So we'll save that. And now if we go back to the app.js, we no longer need to pass these in as props. Okay, so now let's check this out. So we have 3 reviews. Now, remember when I delete, it deletes from the store. And now you can see that this is reacting to the store now. All right, so we have the list all set, we have the stats. Now we just need to make it so that when we add feedback, it's not adding to this array, it adds to the store. And we can do that inside the form. So we shouldn't need to have this, we shouldn't need this, and now we shouldn't need this data here anymore, because it's all from the store. And you can see just how nicely this is cleaning up. So let's go into our form. Feedback form, where is it? Okay, so in our feedback form, let's bring in the store. So that's going to be from /stores. And let's see, we shouldn't need to we shouldn't need to dispatch anything, so we can get rid of this. We can get rid of this. And let's see, in our submit, initially we were dispatching. We don't need to do that anymore either. What we want to do is add it to our store. So in the submit, let's go ahead and call feedback store, and we're going to do an update again, which takes in a function. And remember, what it takes in is the current data or current feedback. All right, and then in here, what we'll do is return an array, and we're going to want the new feedback, which is the object right here that we created. And then we also want to spread across the current feedback that's already there, which is coming from here. All right, and I think we're good. So let's try it out. Now if I send, there we go. So you can see it gets added down here, the stats update. Good, so everything is now dealing with the data that's in the store rather than just having it in the main app component. All right, so that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this and got something from it. As far as deployment, you can run npm run build, and that's going to compile all your code. In fact, we can go ahead and do that. So let's run npm run build, and what that should do is create in your public folder, it'll create a build folder with our bundled code. Okay, so obviously it's all minified and meshed together, but this is it really. This is all you need to include. And as far as hosting, I would suggest Vercel. I've used them a lot for Next.js, but I've used them for Svelte as well. And you can just deploy right from your GitHub repo, or they have a really cool CLI tool that you can use to deploy in seconds. So that's it, guys. Again, hopefully you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.